Fleming in the Philippines here. Now, this video is going to be mainly about the ongoing stupidity of bleep virus panic and lockdown. Totally unnecessary lockdown, something that's going to ruin the country's economy, and you're all going to be paying for it for the rest of your lives. Anyway, I want to tell you a little story first. There are several tribes in New Guinea that have a very interesting social practice. And these were described by the anthropologist Gilbert Herd. One of these tribes he gave the name Sambians. They're not actually called the Sambians, he just called them that so that other people wouldn't be able to find them, or would have more difficulty finding them. They do exist. In fact, there are several different variations on what they do. And here is what they do. The Sambians believe that boys become men by ingesting semen, right? So young boys at the age of 8 and around about then go out into the forest and have meetings with adult Sambian warriors in which they fellate the warriors. And then when the warrior orgasms, they swallow the product, they swallow the ejaculate. And this, the Sambians believe, will turn them into men. Now what's really interesting is, I mean, if that wasn't interesting enough, is that the women, the mothers, are totally in support of this. They think this is great. And Herd mentions in his book that he was amazed when he brought this up with Sambian mothers, and invariably they would, he would ask, well, do you think this really works, I mean, are you sure? And the mothers would go, yes, obviously, it obviously works. Look at little Johnny there, see how masculine he's getting, see how manly? Obviously it works. He's been drinking semen for the last 3 years. Look at the changes that have happened in him. He's turning into a man. Another 5 years of this and he'll be a warrior. There you go. See, that's a great example of what happens when a belief, in this case a pretty harmless one, to be honest with you, it's not doing anybody any harm, and there's no real issues from it. But a belief becomes so important that it takes over from reality. And that's exactly what has happened to the British and to many other governments. A belief manufactured by the WHO, it has to be said, has taken over the minds of the government, and now they are unable to see reality. Because the reality is they are destroying the countries they're meant to be governing. And we're going to have to do something about it. Okay? So let me go on to a few examples now. Now, the first example I want to bring up today comes from the Daily Mail. Now, the Daily Mail is a fairly right-wing paper, but I use the Daily Mail because if the Daily Mail is criticising a Tory government, then there is something really wrong going on. Because under normal circumstances, the Daily Mail would never permit any criticism of a Tory government to enter its hallowed pages. Not these days, anyway. And the headline is, a leading expert argues Britain's crisis, that's coronavirus crisis, peaked before the lockdown even took place. And he says the fatality rate could be as low as 0.1%. So this is written by Connor Boyd, the health reporter for the Mail Online. All right, Sam Blanchard and Steve Matthews. Now, Professor Carl Hennigan, who is at the University of Oxford, says that data show that infection rates halved after the government launched a public information campaign on March 16, urging people to wash their hands and keep 2 meters away from each other. That's 6'6" for the Yankees. He argues that the peak was actually a month ago, a week before lockdown started on March 23, and that the draconian measures people are now living with are completely unnecessary. He said, ministers lost sight of the evidence and rushed to a nationwide quarantine after being instructed by scientific advisors whom he claims have been consistently wrong during the crisis. And that is a claim that I would totally agree with. Reading what the government scientific advisors have been saying, it's just the WHO's panic recipe restated. It's an absolute piece of nonsense. In separate research, the Oxford professor said that he estimates that the true death rate among people who catch the virus is between 0.1 and 0.36%, which is very close to the 0.14% I was discussing the other day. Considerably lower than the 13%, which is a nonsense. It just isn't happening. That is, the 13% is claimed. Scientists, this article says, are now in agreement that the peak of the UK's epidemic seems to have been on April the 8th, when 803 people died. And what Professor Hennigan is doing is he's saying, look, if that was the peak of deaths, and it was, then you have to go back 3 weeks from that to roughly find when the infections happened. And at that time, there was no lockdown. So the peak infections happened before, the peak was reached and infections started to come down before lockdown happened. Lockdown has been a complete waste of time and money. Now, in the same article, it mentions the Chancellor of Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak, you know, we're really lucky to have Rishi Sunak in position because he's one of the few people who actually understands that it's much more important to get the economy working than to protect a couple of thousand elderly people. 75% of the people who die of coronavirus are over 75. 75%. Most people who have coronavirus get either no symptoms or very mild symptoms, something like a bad cold. People think it's really, really bad because they don't realise, having never had the flu, how unpleasant the flu is. And having had the flu, I tell you, I thought I was dying. I really thought I was dying. And I'm very glad I haven't had it since. It's a horrible disease, and that's just the regular seasonal flu. People are exaggerating the effects of coronavirus. Flu kills a lot of people, by the way, maybe 50,000 people a year, just in Britain. The sharp fall, which they've mentioned, adds to evidence that the peak of the UK's epidemic has blown over. So if the peak is over, why are we still locked down? Why are we still seeing government ministers saying, oh, we'll have to stay locked down till Christmas? I'll tell you why. They're too afraid to admit they were wrong. They are incompetent, they know they're incompetent, and they know that if they admit to that incompetence, if they admit that they were railroaded by an incompetent and appallingly yellow press into doing something unbelievably stupid, that's their political careers over, as it should be. Every single one of these people, apart from people like Rishi Sunak, should never see the inside of the House of Commons again. They're not fit to govern. People who willfully and deliberately destroy a country's economy on a chimera, a spook, they're not fit to govern. And people should tell them that. Now, another story, this time from the Daily Star. The Star, maybe not the most reliable of sources, but this one does seem to be, you know, when they quote actual people, they usually are close to the truth. And this says that Professor Ian Fraser, one of the world's leading vaccine inventors, explained why developing a vaccine for COVID-19 could be tricky, but added that the virus might just fade away. This is the chap who invented the groundbreaking HPV cervical cancer vaccine, which has saved an awful lot of lives. You know, that really was an unpleasant, nasty disease that was killing a lot of women, and something that he did a tremendous service to humanity in inventing a vaccine that prevents it. He's Australian, and he said that trying to immunise against the coronavirus was like trying to immunise against a common cold. Difficult to impossible. And as we know, there is no vaccine against the common cold. Coronavirus, this is the professor here, coronavirus does not get into you. It stays on the surface cells of your lungs. All these flu viruses actually get into you, so the body can fight and make T cells, that's, you know, white cells that will combat the invasion. That's why there are 100 vaccines under testing using every conceivable approach. And we don't know if any of them will work. And actually, the chances are none of them will do. On a more positive note, Professor Fraser pointed out that a vaccine was never developed for the SARS outbreak in China in 2003, but it just disappeared on its own. The virus became less effective as it passed from host to host, explained Professor Fraser, which could happen with COVID-19. Now, we'd have to be careful there because, in fact, we also know that news out today, I believe from the Mail again, that Chinese researchers, and I'm really getting fed up of people saying that the Chinese are not reliable. Yeah, their government's not reliable. That doesn't mean they're all unreliable. But they have now identified 20 different strains of COVID. Now, only one of which was formally identified, and that's the one which has arrived in the west coast of the United States. The one which is currently castigating Europe is a much more virulent strain. So this is an organism, as a virus, which already has 20 different mutations. And for each one of those, you'd need a separate vaccine. So I tell you something, Don't hold your breath. There will not be a vaccine. So anybody who's standing up saying, well, we'll just have to keep locked down till there's a vaccine, is lying. They're just lying, because the consequence of that is totally killing the planet. That's killing everybody on the planet. If you have no income, you have no money, you starve to death. It's that simple. And that's what's going to be happening to people very soon. It's already happening in parts of the world. In parts of Africa, we're seeing starvation breaking out because there is no food and they have no money to buy it because of this ludicrous WHO-inspired lockdown. The WHO needs to be closed down. That's my opinion. It did some good work in the past. In recent years, it has been a disaster, along with several other UN bodies. And it needs, frankly, to be closed down. And individual governments will do better than the WHO will do. There is some good news. I have noticed over the last couple of days that many more comments in comment sections of various articles and social media, that many people now are just ignoring the lockdown. They're just saying, and they're admitting it. Whereas 3 weeks ago they'd not say a word. Now they're saying, oh, I've been going out to shops every day as I always did. I've never changed. Now, obviously, the British government goon squad, aka the police, are going to try and do what they can to stop that, but there's a finite number of them. And although they are bullies, although they have already demonstrated that they have no real understanding of the law and make it up as they go along, they're limited in numbers. If everybody says, we're not doing this anymore, they will just have to stand down. I mean, do we really think the government is going to send the troops in and start shooting people? I don't think so. I really don't think so. So, what people have to do is understand that the time for direct action has come because the government is not listening. Boris Johnson, admittedly weakened and sickened by having a nasty bout of this disease, is now too frightened of it to do anything about it. In fact, I think he's lost the ability to be an efficient Prime Minister because of his fear of this disease. And if this fear of his disease lets him play in the hands of idiots like Matt Hancock and the other doomsayers who are trying to keep the economies on a free fall trajectory, then we need another Prime Minister, and we need one soon. And I'd be looking at Rishi Sunak. That's who my man would be. Just to move on a little bit, a few bodies, the OBS, can't remember what it means, British body, which predicts how the economy is doing, had originally suggested that there would be what they called a V-shaped recovery from coronavirus, right? In which it would go down really steeply, but it would come straight back up again. Well, Rishi Sunak has now, at a conference, I believe on Sunday or yesterday, has now confirmed that is not going to happen. He says what's going to happen is it will be a U-shaped recovery, if there's a recovery at all. It might take years for the British economy to get back to pre-lockdown levels. Years. And that's not just Britain, that's across the board. The only reason the British pound is holding up reasonably well at the moment is because everybody else is down too. If Britain were alone in this, then the currency would be through the floor. And the fact is that if Britain drags its heels on getting back to work, which apparently it seems to be wishing to do, then the pound will be valueless within 3 months. Simply valueless. And this is what the government is doing. Ignorance and the determination that the metaphorical ingestion of semen is actually making it work is working. The lockdown isn't working. It never worked. It was never necessary. It's time to end it right now. And if the government won't end it, then people will have to take direct action. They're already doing that across Europe and across the United States. People are out in the streets saying, we've had enough of this. You're going to have to stop. And the British people are going to have to develop some kind of a spine and do something about it. You know, the sheeple, the people who'll do anything the government says, they've been pretty noisy. And I'm sick fed up listening to them. That's my economy. It's my children's lives you're ruining. My children's lives. Their futures are being destroyed by this complete and utter nonsense. This unnecessary, pointless lockdown. Let's understand. One final point. We've already said it's practically impossible to get a vaccine for this. If we can't get a vaccine, if there is no vaccine in the pipeline, and no, Bill Gates, I don't think you're going to make even more money producing and flogging a vaccine. I really don't. And I think you're a thoroughly disgusting little man, to be honest with you. Having said that, if there's no vaccine in sight, there is no point in lockdown. Because at some point you will have to lift it in order, because you can't go on forever. Either the people will simply say enough, or your economy will be in such a mess that you can't do anything but lift it. And if there's no vaccine, it doesn't matter whether you lift it tomorrow or in 6 months or in 2 years. The effect will be exactly the same, precisely the same. Those who would die of complications of coronavirus or who are pushed by coronavirus over the end will die anyway, if they're not already dead by the time they lift it. And at the same time, what we're doing now is we have a situation where, another story there, a consultant surgeon saying that he has been told he cannot carry out life-saving cancer surgeries because of coronavirus. Now that might well be the effect, the consequence of his local NHS trust, because these are run by bureaucrats who don't know what they're doing as well, rather than actual direction from the government. But this is direct evidence of people dying, being killed by the coronavirus lockdown. Directly being killed. They didn't need to die. They're being killed so that you can keep a few nonagenarians alive. It's absolutely obscene. That's the only word for it. It's obscene, and it has to stop. It must stop now. Thank you. Bye-bye.